Normally, when we get to joint policy briefings, it's about the location-based or the geographic. Has been to understand the local, historical, socioeconomic, and cultural dynamics and infrastructures that allow platform labor to land, specifically in different contexts. And this goes from the assumption that although these are global platforms that bring different kinds of work across the globe, we call them planetary labor markets, we come from the assumption that when they land in different economies and cultures, it will be different. Right? And what factors make them different? So here in this talk, I look at the interconnectedness of global platforms like Upwork, onlinejobs.ph, Rev, for example, and then how they blend with local infrastructures and socialities. So looking at both the technology and the human interaction that in the end shape labor arrangements between workers and clients. So I'll zoom in on what we call the platform brokerage ecosystem that we find manifesting or emerging in the Philippine context. And while I'm building on a paper I shared with Ezekiel, which is on digital labor in the Philippines, emerging forms of brokerage, I'm really building on 3 waves of studies that I've done with some colleagues. And we started doing this research in 2015, right? So, and at that time, we were really just trying to feel the space. What is happening in the cloud work economy? What is happening in the online freelancing economy? Why is the Philippines becoming a prominent labor supplier of these platforms? We looked at collective spaces and did collective space ethnographies as well. And then in the second wave, so that initial study was done mainly in Metro Manila, talking to freelancers and going to both online and in-person collective spaces, like co-working spaces. Then the next one, we realized it was growing all over the country. And then we went to 2 key sites outside of Metro Manila. That was Iligan and Cebu. Iligan was a particular curious space because we realized that a particular cooperative that had very radical perspectives towards global platformization was emerging there, which was Prop Up. So we went to Iligan, but we also realized that there was a hub there of freelance communities that was growing. Same for Cebu. And then the more recent research that we're doing, which is on transaction ecosystems, platforms and ecosystems, we're doing the study in the Philippines, but it's in partnership with several other researchers that are doing this in other parts of Asia. We are looking at ecosystems, how social media platforms, fintech platforms, and labor platforms coalesce, right? So we're looking at ecosystems of platforms. And this is the common imagery of how platforms work, right? So a platform mediates the relationship between a client and a worker, or for example, we call them more labor supply and labor demand. So a labor platform matches labor supply and demand through its technological features. And across many studies, we're mapping cloud work typologies by different scholars. Across all typologies, normally, of course, the point of reference is really the global platform. So whether we are looking at how platforms vary in terms of skill levels that they offer, or the skill levels required within the different kinds of work, or the scale of task. For example, they will typologize online freelancing spaces or platforms as either cloud work or micro tasks. So cloud work is a more general. You could take a lot of different kinds of jobs, maybe kinds of tasks that are more long-term, right? Versus micro work or click work, for example. And then there's typologies in terms of different types of services, matching models, who initiates transactions, how tasks are cascaded, whether it's individual or the cloud, payment models or languages of platforms. The point of reference is normally the global platform. And that was also what we were doing initially, even in 2015, right? So this photo on the left is a photo of an online freelancing fair of remote workers way back in 2015. And you can see from the banner here how it was really mostly moderated by larger platforms. So there was Golans, was the main sponsor of this event. It had Payoneer, Paymaya, and a couple more large platforms. Compare that to this pamphlet that came out of Get Hired, a recent event that was conducted. Get Hired is an emerging local platform. But if you see the many different kinds of community partners, you can have a sense of what I'm talking about in terms of the ecosystem that is growing in the Philippine context. I'll talk more about that. So what I'll focus here is on this intersection, which we call the platform ecosystem of brokerage, where we mean that although you have global platforms, there's an emerging ecosystem of brokerage dynamics that blends global platforms and local organization, local emerging forms of organization that actually mediates between labor demand and labor supply. And I guess the core argument is that it's crucial to understand these dynamics if we want to really develop specific policies in relation to platform work in the Philippine context. So in a paper we published sometime in 2021, 2022, we started to map this, the different actors. But in this particular paper, we looked at their reference to the global platform and how much they were responding to the logics of labor platformization. So of course, you have your platforms, Upwork, Fiverr, and Rev. These are what we call remote working platforms. They offer different kinds of work. They match labor supply and labor demand. But we are starting to see here worker agencies. These are individual freelancers re-outsourcing their work to other workers. These are local platforms that are emerging. They're still getting work, large chunks of work, for example, from platforms, but then they have created a local platform to be able to do the matching process. And then you have platform outsourcing agencies that are emerging as well. Platform cooperatives are slightly different because they have more specific intentions to challenge specific arrangements that are being advanced in global platforms. So for example, Wrap-Up, which unfortunately died in the course of the pandemic, they were very specific of what they didn't like about the way global platforms operated. So specifically, they looked at sharing models, revenue sharing models. They felt that it was critical for platforms to have a role in mentoring and skill building, for example. And at the same time, they didn't like the connects fees that global platforms charge. And also they wanted to reduce the commissions of platforms that platforms charge over the gigs that whenever they get to match work. Connected Women, for example, had a very specific perspective of wanting to advance the conditions of women freelance workers, for example. So they have specific intentions. POPSCO is a little blurry because they intend in the future to be able to, for example, facilitate dividend or revenue sharing, but they're not yet there. But nonetheless, they are trying to build a community of freelancers. So we put them here. And then the last one are totally platform independent agencies already. They were freelancers when they started. They worked here. They got more stable clients, but they started way, way back. And some of the owners of these agencies were pioneers of the industry, and they felt they already had stable clients, and they set up their own agencies. When I say agencies, they're no longer platformized. They give their workers all the benefits, like a regular company. So we're seeing this unfolding, and we felt, for the course of my discussion, I'll focus a little bit more on here. At the same time, in our recent mapping, we realized an entire ecosystem of support. So the online freelancing economy thrives in Metro Manila, but also outside of Metro Manila through the organizational and material support provided towards it by different sets of actors that the agencies are also mobilizing, right, to be able to continually spur its growth. So we're seeing training, coaching, and communities. These are just examples. That there are many, many more within the ecosystem. Right? And then we can see modular work processes. So these are HR systems, for example, that can be modularly taken by smaller agencies so that they don't have to provide them or develop them internally. So they provide accounting support, HR support. So you can just buy those services. And then there are feeder schools. We realized that those agencies actually tie to schools for internships. And then for material support, of course, there are co-working spaces, and we already know this. But we also realize a lot of equipment rentals, right? People don't necessarily get the chance to buy their equipment, but there are rental companies that are spurring. But there's also financing and lending. We know that from the global client, there's the payment or the compensation is passed to the local worker. But then within the context of agencies, money goes around. Sometimes an agency or a worker located in Metro Manila, for example, may be re-outsourcing work to other workers, family members, neighbors, communities located in the provinces, for example. And a lot of transfers, financial transfers take place within that context. So what we're seeing is that when we look at the sources of variations, it's critical to look at the sources of variations at the level of these ecosystems of brokerage, because there are emerging sources of variations that are coming up as well. So for example, questions of formality, geographic tethering, and also dependency on global platforms and logics. I'll talk more about this in a couple of slides. Right. So what we're finding interesting is that in this particular paper, they argued that global platforms like Upwork, etc., they are actually temporary agencies. They're actually functioning like temporary agencies, except that algorithms work within these platforms that kind of reshape them into how they function. So essentially, they're like temporary labor agencies. We know temporary labor agencies, I guess from Dole ILS, right? They already function for migrant workers, for example. And the argument here is that the platformization, the inclusion of algorithmic work, transforms temporary work agencies. But what we're seeing is that temporary work agencies are emerging again, right, in the context of this ecosystem. As I'm showing, if platforms are the technological version of temporary work agencies, well, in reality, temporary work agencies are also re-emerging within this ecosystem. So when I speak about brokerage, our study is anchored on the sociological notion of brokerage, which has roots in the Philippine cultural economy context. Labor brokers like the cabos have historically matched workers and worker suppliers and also demand for work. And so there are two critical functions of brokers in an economy. First is that it becomes a central point for making visible hidden information. So think about migration brokers or agencies. They create value because they make visible information about who to go to, how to access X and X kinds of clearances. And in the context of so many levels of approvals and processes that one needs to navigate, a broker is able to put all those together. At the same time, it connects disconnected identities. So it connects varied information that are hidden or obscured from one's regular person's view. And second, it connects disconnected entities. And our argument has been that these brokers, both the global platform and the emerging local brokers, also create value within the digital labor economy because they're able to put together hidden information to make them more palatable and more easily navigatable by ordinary freelance workers. And next, they help them connect to particular entities within the ecosystem, as I showed in the previous slide. And digital labor brokerage happens within two levels: skill and community building, and then re-outsourcing. Right. So I'll begin probably with skill and community building, but they really are very much infused together. So when we say skill and community building, we're pertaining here to the crucial role of bridging platforms and workers informally. So this has already been documented in many different kinds of research. within platform work and online freelancing, there are many ambiguities and challenges for regular workers. And I clustered them into different colors pertaining to different kinds of skills that they need to be able to build, but also the different kinds of demands that labor platformization calls for. So one needs to identify a particular skill and build that, whether it is virtual assistants, whether it's digital content moderation, whether it is digital marketing. There is a kind of an expertise building. And then you need to be able to not just have that skill, you actually need to sell that skill or show that you have that skill. And then you need to price your skill within a very ambiguous market when you don't actually know how much exactly an hour of this work should cost. And then there's relationship building, because most of them work with global clients of different kinds of cultures. So these pertain to client building, these pertain to skill building, the functional aspect of skill building. These pertain to digital skills building, having to be able to navigate the platform environment, because everything happens within a computer-mediated environment. Everything is a digital environment, and you can ask to a certain extent other freelancers, but not normally within the platform ecosystem. You also need to be able to understand complaint mechanisms, and then platform diversification and be able to sustain one's earnings from the platform in the context of seasonality are also dimensions. So in the context of all these ambiguities, those pioneers of the industry, those coaches that have started with online freelancing for several years ahead, they managed to be able to shape the attractiveness and the capabilities of regular freelancers, especially newbies, to be able to enter the ecosystem. This happens in the context of social media groups that have emerged quite a lot, not just on Facebook, they're also now on TikTok, they're also now on YouTube. And they help them build relationships with clients, build skills, navigate which platforms, look for less commissions, and so on and so forth. And when we were studying this early on, 2018 and 2019, they were quite an emerging economy because they're also earning from their coaching and influence mechanisms. But at the same time, they use that as a pivot for being able to create pools or communities of freelancers where now they can re-outsource large chunks of work that they're able to take from platforms. So in early 2015, we saw individual freelancers cascading work to other workers. This is very informal. So for example, they might cascade it to one's husband, one's children, one's neighbors, one's villagers, quite informally. But 2016 onwards, we're looking at agencies starting to build, wherein workers would mediate for clients to be able to re-outsource that work into other workers. No? They're starting to register them as well. And examples, these are examples of these outsourcing agencies or re-outsourcing agencies. There are many, many more now emerging. So you have Scale Expert, VA Service Provider, VA Coconut, et cetera, et cetera. And virtual assistant being the niche economy of online freelancers in the Philippines, it's critical to look at them. These are just examples of how they look like. So they're not yet fully platforms, but they can hire workers that now provide gigs or work for those agencies that may be tethered to global platforms in terms of labor demand. Okay, so I guess this is preliminary because we're continually doing this study. So in the face of emerging labor agencies, we think it's crucial to look at the opaque process of labor reintermediation here. So essentially, these agencies organize labor and worker client arrangements as well, just like platforms. So they facilitate client-worker transparency. They also determine job and worker visibility. They determine pricing and compensation models for the workers within their teams or within their agencies. They determine how much they are paid, when they will be paid, under what conditions they will be paid. They essentially negotiate for clients the pricing for a particular chunk of job, and they facilitate the visibility or what will they make visible within this ecosystem. So preliminarily, we're looking at variations of agencies Along the lines of, do they provide training to make sure that the people within their agency can get good compensation for their gigs? Are they formal or informal? Are they government supported? Are they registered? Does the agency have any payment platforms or account under its name? Is the agency run by just one or two people or a large team? Do they coordinate physically or remotely? There are different variations in then payment terms. Do they pay contractors per hour or per output per project? Does the agency obfuscate the actual amount the client pays to them for contractors? Do they split payments? Do they pay the contractors at least half of the client payment? Agency niche? Does the agency focus on a specific niche of worker or subsector? All these we don't know, but they're operating and continually growing an ecosystem of agencies. And I guess just to nuance the idea, because a lot of the research would say, oh, it's a precarious labor environment. Perhaps we also do geographically tethered platform work, and in that context, it is true. But in the context of cloud work and micro work, it really depends on where the worker is within the ecosystem. So some workers are able to navigate the ecosystem and turn into agencies. They get to control the conditions of work for other workers, and they're able to navigate and negotiate with clients for larger chunks of work and better pay. But the question is whether they are actually able to cascade better working conditions for the workers within their teams. So these conditions of platform labor that I mentioned earlier, the challenges and the ambiguities, certain agencies that become successful or workers that become successful are able to develop management expertise, maintain large client portfolios through reputation management. They build longer-term relationships with clients and diversify skills and platforms. And this allows them to establish agencies as well, and become influencers or coaches within the ecosystem. So I think in the next two slides of closing, why does it matter to segregate the category remote working beyond size or skill? Normally, the segregation is cloud work or micro work, right? Cloud is a size. Cloud work is normally determined in the context of size of work or the skills necessary to be able to conduct the work. Micro work is normally click work. It's small, it's piece rate. So we argue that mapping to include workers of different categories within different contracting arrangements in the ecosystem can provide needs-based solutions instead of a blanket solution. Again, different freelancers at different levels within this ecosystem. And it helps us know the targets of policy. Are we looking at the global platform, the local agencies, the companies, or the communities, or the individual worker? Understand worker conditions and rights and protections across layers of intermediation, and the importance of consultations with leading groups of cloud workers at every stage of policymaking. Why? Because we realize that these agency leaders partner quite a lot with local governments. For example, the POFCON that got conducted in Legazpi recently, there was a close partnership between the Legazpi local government and also freelancing communities. And so why is it useful to map the ecosystem of brokerage dynamics? Well, labor platform or labor platformization is actually constituted by the interconnectedness of global and local technology and the vibrancy of Filipino worker sociality and entrepreneurship. It helps us map out the largely unseen and unregulated sub-economy to mitigate against abuses. Again, we don't know what kinds of labor arrangements those agencies are facilitating. It also shows the divergences, those that operate to sustain or challenge the power embedded in global platforms, and it opens up to local possibilities of challenging the global power of platforms. And last, it can help us support and strengthen the ecosystems of support amongst these freelancing communities. So I copied here some of the works that I've built on for this talk. Thank you very much.